a standing ovation was frequently a cover for a mass exodus. So I appreciate it. Ken, thank you for the introduction. I'm grateful for the opportunity to serve with you, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to address each of you today. I want to begin by doing something that I suspect doesn't get done frequently enough. That is to thanking you for your hard work and to asking you to thank your families for the hard work that they have shared with you as you have had to sacrifice your time and energy and frequently ask them to displace their activities in favor of your service to America. Some of the greatest burdens of public service are borne by husbands and wives and children, but it's also a great opportunity for us to teach each other that there are things worth sacrificing for, and the kind of freedom and opportunity, the kind of respect for human dignity, the kind of independence, the potential for achievement that America embraces. These are values worth fighting for and worth sacrificing for. Our family members have sacrificed, and they too are deserving of our thanks and gratitude. We've come through a difficult time for our nation, a time that's dramatically tested our strength. It's tested the spirit and resolve of all Americans. For 2 months now, America has been keenly aware of the new and continuing threat of terrorism. For 2 months, we've endured the videotaped taunts of Osama bin Laden. For 2 months, Americans have had their lives disrupted. Law enforcement has had to work overtime in a very serious way. But throughout dozens of warnings, a deliberate campaign of terrorist disruption and tighter security around potential targets, instead of America getting weaker, America has grown stronger. Americans have made difficult adjustments, and so too have the men and women of justice and law enforcement. The attacks of September the 11th have redefined the mission of the Department of Justice. Defending our nation and its citizens against terrorist attacks is now our first and overriding priority. We are engaged in an aggressive arrest and detention campaign of lawbreakers with a single objective: to get terrorists off the street before they can harm more Americans. We have modeled our tactics after a previous Justice Department fighting a different threat to the nation. The Justice Department of Robert F. Kennedy, it was said, would arrest a mobster for spitting on the sidewalk if it would help in the fight against organized crime. In the war on terror, it is our policy, the policy of this Department of Justice, to be equally aggressive in protecting American citizens. We will arrest and detain any suspected terrorist who has violated the law. Our efforts in all cases will be conducted with full respect for the rights and freedoms of all Americans. But make no mistake, terrorists who are in violation of the law will be convicted. In some cases, they'll be deported. In all cases, they'll be prevented from doing further harm to Americans. Last week, I announced a sweeping wartime reorganization of the Department of Justice that places a high priority on cooperation and coordination between Washington and state and local prosecutors and law enforcement officials. Our plan calls for refocusing on our core mission and responsibilities with the understanding that the department cannot be all things to all people. We cannot do everything we once did because lives now depend on us doing a few things very well. We will refocus our resources on frontline positions. The war on terrorism will be fought not so much in Washington, but in the field, by agents, prosecutors, investigators, and analysts. Our long-term goal is to transfer 10% of the current headquartered-based individuals to field offices where the citizens are served and where the security of Americans is undertaken. Our new mission requires not just a new structure, but a new approach. from each of us to our jobs. In evaluating the merits of a prosecution, assistant U.S. attorneys must consider more than the scale of the case, but the likelihood that prosecution may disrupt and dismantle terrorist networks. In the changed world in which we now live, a seemingly routine prosecution of an immigration violation may be much more important than $1 million fraud case, because the immigration prosecution or minor identity theft case may remove a terrorist operative from our community. It is critical that we begin to view our responsibilities as justice officials in the fight against terrorism from the standpoint of the culture as a whole, not just from the individual case at hand. Individuals who perpetrate anthrax hoaxes, for example, have committed serious violations of the law and must be charged and prosecuted accordingly. Perpetrators of these crimes often claim that they were meant just to be among friends. But the fact is that anthrax hoaxes do not long remain just between friends. They involve serious diversions of resources from already taxed police, FBI, and emergency response systems. The cost to taxpayers from the waste of time and energy runs into tens of thousands of dollars per incident. As prosecutors, you wouldn't view the theft of $30,000 from the U.S. Treasury as a harmless joke. Terrorist hoaxes aren't harmless jokes either. They're costly, they're serious offenses that demand a serious response. As you know, on September the 17th, I directed each United States Attorney's Office to establish an anti-terrorism task force that brings together federal and state and local anti-terrorism officials. These anti-terrorism task forces serve three distinct purposes. First, to gather information from and to disseminate information to federal, state, and local agencies. Second, to use swiftly and intelligently such information to prevent future attacks from occurring. And third, to ensure an efficient, effective, and coordinated response to any future terrorist incident in a particular district. To those of you who have been selected as anti-terrorism coordinators for your districts, I congratulate you. I have asked that the best and brightest of those persons capable of attending to these responsibilities be appointed to these responsibilities, and I see that my request has been honored. You have been entrusted with a great responsibility. Remember that the experience, determination, and professionalism that you bring to this job are lessons and examples for those who work with you and look to you for leadership. The task force coordinators will be responsible for ensuring that federal, state, local law enforcement all communicate regularly regarding potential terrorist activity. You'll be responsible as well for ensuring that the information highway is not merely a one-way street. Just as federal officials must have access to information collected at the state and local level, task force members from state and local police must have access to appropriate information available to federal agencies. The battle against terrorism will require an unprecedented level of cooperation among members of the law enforcement community and beyond. As I've said before, I want to emphasize again today how crucial it is that we share with the necessary federal or state agencies and local agencies as soon as possible any information that exposes a credible threat to the public or to national security. Even though this may hinder a criminal investigation, prevention of terrorist attacks, even at the expense of a prosecution, must be our priority. When there is a balance to be struck between protecting a source and protecting America, we must resolve the balance in favor of protecting America. To facilitate this communication today, I am issuing a directive to all United States attorneys mandating that they begin immediately to develop communication protocols for sharing information with state and local leaders. Each district is to designate a chief information officer to serve on its anti-terrorism task force. This officer will consult with state and local officials on how best to disseminate information within the district. Based on these suggestions, by December the 1st of this year, each district will develop communication protocols for sharing information with the leaders of the local anti-terrorism task forces, as well as chiefs of police and elected officials who may not be members of the task force in their district. Effective communication is vital because the task forces will be one of the primary vehicles through which we will call upon the assistance of our state and local partners. Now, as you know, I have just directed the task forces to coordinate the interviews of individuals who we believe may have information helpful to our investigative and prevention efforts. By necessity, many, if not most, of these interviews will be conducted by members of state and local law enforcement. Task force coordinators will be responsible for collecting interview reports so that the information contained in those reports can be thoroughly analyzed. We will recognize that this will be a time-consuming and complicated task, but it is critical that we expand our knowledge of terrorist networks operating within the United States. This intelligence gathering initiative only serves to underscore the obvious. September 11th changed us and changed the way we do our jobs. Now, the department has worked with and will continue to work with Congress to obtain the additional tools we need to fight effectively against terrorism. The recently passed anti-terrorism legislation, the USA Patriot Act of 2001, accomplished much to improve our effectiveness in our effort to intercept and to stop terrorists. In particular, the new law gives us an expanded ability to share information between and within the law enforcement and intelligence communities. Our ability to share information is only as good as our capacity to identify useful intelligence. Therefore, today I am issuing a second directive to provide training to federal, state, and local law enforcement in the use of all available resources in the war on terrorism, including training on foreign intelligence, how to identify it, and with whom to share it. No later than January the 31st, a training session shall be convened for anti-terrorism coordinators and task force members, including state and local members. Another training session will be conducted for chiefs of police and state and local trainers, regardless of whether or not they are members of the district's anti-terrorism task force. In addition to these fundamental changes, I am establishing a national law enforcement coordinating committee on counterterrorism. The purpose of the coordinating committee will be to provide the Attorney General with recommendations on how to facilitate better cooperation and communication between all levels of law enforcement in the war on terrorism. This enhanced coordination will center around three areas: organization, information, and equipment and training. I'm asking for an action plan to be developed by this committee to provide me with recommendations on how the Department of Justice can better facilitate and promote cooperation between federal, state, and local law enforcement. Now, due to the high priority the department places on disrupting terrorist activity, I am requesting that this report be submitted within 6 months of the committee's inception. I'm also directing that $9.3 million be made available to support state and local participation in anti-terrorism task forces. This approximately $100,000 per task force should be used as seed money to help our state and local partners meet the emerging communication and information sharing demands placed on them by our new responsibilities. This money could be used, for example, to pay for an intelligence analyst or communications equipment. Additional state and local funding is also available through existing Department of Justice grants. And you should encourage members of your task forces to apply for that funding where needed. I've asked Deborah Daniels, Assistant Attorney General for the Office of Justice Programs, to make these requests by U.S. attorneys a priority. I know how valuable your time is during this challenging and turbulent period, and I want to thank you for taking the time to be here today. I hope that you'll return to your districts with the additional guidance and direction that you need to continue your extraordinary efforts to combat terrorism. I recognize that the work that we're asking you to do, when added to the duties that you're already doing, has required great sacrifice from you, your families, and your colleagues. At the conclusion of the Second World War came the reckoning at Nuremberg. Former Attorney General and former Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson led the prosecution of 21 Nazi defendants for crimes against their countrymen, crimes against their neighbors, and indeed crimes against humanity. All 21 Nazi defendants pleaded not guilty. Some claimed that they were merely following orders. Others disputed the jurisdiction of the court. But Jackson successfully argued their guilt with a sense of urgency born of a civilization threatened by a new force of evil. Quote, "The wrongs which we seek to condemn and punish have been so calculated, so malignant, and so devastating," said Jackson, "that civilization cannot tolerate their being ignored because it cannot survive their being repeated." It is now as it was then. A calculated, malignant, devastating evil has arisen in our world. Civilization cannot ignore the wrongs that have been done. America will not tolerate their being repeated. Justice has a new mission, a new calling against an old evil. I want to thank you for your hard work and your leadership. God bless you in your endeavors, and God bless the United States of America.